All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into something a little different. We're talking about AI, but not the fun stuff you usually hear about, more like the stuff that keeps you up at night, the potential risks, the dark side of AI, if you will.
Oh, yeah, the stuff that makes you go, maybe we need to think about this a bit more.
Exactly. And to help us unpack all of this, we're turning to Professor Ahmed Benefa's article on LinkedIn, The Dark Side of AI, Risks, Challenges, and the Need for Responsible Development.
That title alone is pretty attention-grabbing.
Oh, it gets right to the point, that's for sure. It was published on May 12th of this year, 2024, and it really lays out some important concerns as AI becomes, more and more a part of our everyday lives.
Yeah, Professor Benefa doesn't sugarcoat anything. He just puts it all out there, which is, I think, what makes it so valuable.
Absolutely. One of the first things he jumps into is AI bias. Now, we've all seen the headlines about, algorithms gone wrong, but it's more than just like a few lines of bad code, right?
Right, it's way more than that. Think of AI as a mirror. It's reflecting the biases that already exist in our society.
So the problem isn't the AI itself, but the data it's learning from.
Exactly. It's like garbage in, garbage out, as they say.
And Professor Benefa gives this really striking example with Amazon. Remember that AI hiring system they were using?
Oh, yeah, the one that ended up discriminating against women?
Yeah, that one.
It's a bit unsettling when you think about it.
How did that even happen? I mean, it's not like the AI was intentionally trying to be sexist.
Well, it all goes back to the data. The system was trained on historical hiring data. Right? And that data, unfortunately, reflects the lack of gender balance in the tech industry.
So the AI was just repeating the patterns it saw in the past.
Yeah, basically saying, well, this is how it's always been, so this is how it should be.
Which is not exactly the direction we want to be heading in.
And it's not just limited to hiring either. Professor Benefa also talks about those facial recognition systems.
Oh, the ones that are less accurate at identifying people with darker skin tones.
Yep, that's another example where this bias can lead to real-world harm.
It's almost like we're building these systems that are blind to the problems that already exist.
Or even worse, amplifying those problems.
Which brings us to another big concern that Professor Benefa raises, the black box problem. I gotta say, this one always makes me a little uneasy.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit creepy.
Can you break it down for us? Like, what exactly is the black box problem?
So you've got these AI systems, especially the really complex ones, the ones using deep learning and all that. We can see what information goes in, and we can see the decision that comes out.
Right.
But the actual process in between, how the AI arrived at that decision, that's often hidden. It's like a magic trick where you don't get to see how it's done.
So we're essentially trusting AI to make important decisions without fully understanding how it's making them.
That's the gist of it, yeah. Professor Benefa asks us to imagine this. You apply for a loan where you need medical treatment, and you're denied based on an AI's decision.
Oh.
But you have absolutely no way of knowing why.
Yeah. That's not a good feeling.
It really raises questions about accountability and fairness,
Yeah.
Like, how much can we really trust these systems if we don't even know how they're working?
It's a tough one for sure. And it kind of makes you think, like, how much control are we willing to give up? Which, speaking of control, brings us to another biggie, data privacy. I feel like I'm constantly hearing about AI and data collection, but how deep does this rabbit hole actually go?
Oh, it goes deep, believe me. AI applications are always collecting and analyzing our personal information. Our browsing history, our location data, even our conversations.
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around how much data is actually being collected.
It's mind-boggling, the sheer volume of it.
And I know everyone talks about those targeted ads, the ones that seem to know exactly what you're thinking. But is that the main concern here? Or is there something even more sinister going on?
Well, targeted advertising is just one piece of the puzzle. The bigger worry is that all this data can be used to, manipulate us, to predict our choices, influence our decisions, maybe even steer us in directions that aren't really in our best interests.
It's almost like we're like puppets in a digital show and we don't even realize it.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it.
And even though there are regulations in place like GDPR and CCPA, it often feels like technology is moving faster than the rules can keep up.
It's a constant game of catch up.
So we've talked about bias, lack of transparency, data vulnerability, and now we got to address the elephant in the room, the one that's been making headlines lately.
Yeah.
Killer robots.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It sounds like something out of science fiction, but Professor Benefa seems to think it's a very real threat.
He definitely does. Autonomous weapons, or killer robots, as some people call them, they're becoming more and more sophisticated.
And more concerning, right?
Absolutely. These systems are designed to, identify targets, engage with threats, all without any direct human control.
It's a chilling thought, to be honest. A machine deciding when to take a human life. What happens if they malfunction? Or worse, what if they get hacked?
That's a Pandora's box we might not want to open. It raises so many questions about ethics and accountability. Like, who's responsible when an AI makes a life or death decision? And what are the consequences if those decisions go wrong?
It's a lot to think about. We've covered some pretty heavy stuff today. Bias, lack of transparency, data vulnerability, weaponized AI. It's a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
But, Professor Banafa doesn't just leave us with a sense of doom and gloom. He actually offers some hope, some potential paths forward.
Oh, good. I was starting to think this was a one-way ticket to a dystopian future. So what does a more hopeful future with AI look like? What are the choices we need to be making?
One of the biggest things we need to think about is AI and, the future of work. That whole robots are taking our jobs thing, it's not just a sci-fi plot anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely feeling more and more real these days. Every time I open the news, there's another article about AI automating some job. I think a lot of our listeners are probably wondering, what does this mean for me? Is my job safe?
And Professor Banafa, he doesn't shy away from that question at all. He acknowledges that AI is going to disrupt the job market, especially for jobs that are, repetitive or that don't require a lot of creativity.
So it's not just factory workers and truck drivers who should be worried.
Nope, not at all. We're talking about white-collar jobs, too. AI can write, it can design, it can even make decisions. Professor Benefa's point is that we need to be preparing for a future where a lot of the jobs we have today, they just might not exist anymore.
That's a pretty scary thought. What happens to all those people who lose their jobs? Do we just, leave them behind?
That's where the idea of proactive solutions comes in. Professor Banafa talks a lot about the need for education and retraining.
Yeah.
We need to be teaching people the skills they'll need for the jobs of the future, not the jobs that are, on their way out.
So it's about adapting, not resisting.
Exactly. We need to be focusing on things like critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, skills that AI can't replicate, at least not yet.
But what about the people who, get left behind in this transition? The ones who lose their jobs and maybe don't have the resources to retrain?
Professor Banafa argues that we need to create a safety net for those people. Things like stronger unemployment benefits, job training programs, maybe even something like universal basic income.
So basically recognizing that this shift is going to have winners and losers and making sure that we're taking care of the people who are most vulnerable.
Exactly. It's about being humane about it. Technology should be serving us, not the other way around.
It's a lot to think about, all this. It feels like we're standing on the edge of this huge societal shift, and it's hard to know what's going to happen next.
It's definitely a time of rapid change and uncertainty. But the good news is, Professor Banafa believes that we have a choice. We're not just along for the ride, we can actually shape the future of AI.
Okay, so what can we do? I mean, we're not all AI experts or, tech CEOs. How can everyday people like us make a difference?
Well, first of all, Professor Banafa says we need to stay informed. The more we understand about AI, the better equipped we are to make good decisions about it.
Knowledge is power, right?
Right. And then we need to be talking about these issues, having conversations with our friends, our families, our colleagues, about the ethics of AI, about the values we want to see reflected in these systems.
So, where do we draw the line? When does innovation become, dangerous?
Exactly. Those are the conversations we need to be having.
And finally, we need to hold the people in power accountable.
We need to be pushing for transparency from companies. We need to be supporting organizations that are advocating for responsible AI development. And we need to be pushing for regulations that protect our rights and our safety.
So it's about being active citizens, not just passive consumers.
Exactly. We need to be engaged, we need to be informed, and we need to be speaking up.
I gotta say, I'm feeling a little bit more hopeful now. It's not just about being afraid of AI, it's about understanding it and working to make sure that it's used for good.
That's the key takeaway, I think. Professor Banafa's article, it's not meant to scare us, it's meant to empower us.
I think we've covered a lot today. The risks of AI bias, the lack of transparency, the concerns about job displacement, even the possibility of AI becoming, smarter than humans.
It's been a pretty intense deep dive, that's for sure. But hopefully it's given our listeners a better understanding of the challenges we're facing and the importance of making sure that AI is developed responsibly.
Before we wrap up, I'd love to get your final thoughts. Give us something to ponder as we move forward in this crazy technological world.
Well, Professor Benafa ends his article with a question. And it's a question that I think we should all be asking ourselves. How can we, as individuals and as a society, ensure that AI is used for good? How can we prevent it from becoming a force for harm or inequality?
That's a big question, and it's one that doesn't have an easy answer, but it's a question that we all need to be thinking about. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the scary stuff, the what ifs, but Professor Benafa, he doesn't just leave us hanging, right? He actually talks about solutions, like a roadmap for how we can develop AI responsibly.
Yeah, and the really encouraging thing is that a lot of people are taking this seriously. It's not just, a few academics talking about it in their ivory towers. There are actual practical steps being taken.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom.
No, not at all. There's a whole movement happening right now. Researchers, policymakers, tech companies, they're all working together to try to make sure that AI is used ethically and for the benefit of humanity.
So what are they doing? Like, what are some of the concrete things that are happening?
Well, one of the big things is the development of AI ethics principles. Think of it like a Hippocratic oath for AI.
I like that, a Hippocratic oath for AI.
Yeah, it's all about prioritizing things like fairness, transparency, accountability, making sure that AI respects human rights, that kind of thing.
So it's like baking ethics into the very core of AI.
Exactly.
And who's leading the charge on this?
Well, you've got organizations like the OECD and the European Union. They're creating frameworks for ethical AI development. And a lot of tech companies are adopting their own internal guidelines too.
So it's almost like we need a whole new renaissance, but this time it's for AI.
That's a great way to put it.
We need to be thinking about the impact on society, not just the technology itself.
And that's why it's so important to have, a diversity of voices at the table. Professor Benafa talks about the need for interdisciplinary collaboration. It's not enough to just have computer scientists working on this. You need ethicists, philosophers, social scientists, legal experts, even artists and writers.
Wow, that's quite the team.
Yeah, because this is a complex issue. It's not just about code. It's about values. It's about humanity.
And speaking of complexity, there's this idea that's always in the back of my mind. You know those sci-fi movies where AI gets so smart that it starts making decisions we don't understand and maybe we don't even agree with?
Oh yeah, the whole AI taking over the world scenario.
Is anyone actually doing anything to address that?
Well, there's a whole field of research called AI safety. It's all about trying to anticipate those potential risks and coming up with ways to make sure that AI stays safe, reliable, and aligned with human values.
Okay, so instead of panicking about a robot uprising, we're actually trying to prevent it.
Exactly.
That's a bit reassuring.
Yeah, and there's some really brilliant people working on this.
Yeah.
But it's not just up to the experts, we all have a role to play.
Okay, so what can we do? I mean, most of us aren't AI researchers or policymakers or anything like that.
Well, the first thing, like I said before, is to stay informed. Read about AI, learn about the issues so you can make informed decisions.
Right, knowledge is power.
And then talk about it. Have conversations with your friends, your family, your coworkers about what you think about AI, about the ethical implications. The more we talk about these things, the more likely we are to find solutions.
And what about those of us who, maybe want to do more than just talk?
Well, there are definitely ways to get involved. You can support organizations that are working on responsible AI development. You can contact your elected officials and tell them that you care about this issue. You can even start your own initiatives if you're feeling ambitious.
Wow, so there's a lot we can do.
There really is.
Yeah.
It's not about being passive. It's about being proactive. It's about shaping the future of AI rather than letting it shape us.
I like that, shaping the future. The deep dive has been, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, to be honest, but I feel like I've learned a lot.
Me too. It's been a great conversation.
And I think the most important takeaway is that, AI isn't inherently good or bad. It's how we use it that matters.
Exactly. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for evil.
And it's up to us to make sure that it's used for good.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up.
Yeah, I think so too.
To our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the dark side of AI. It's been a thought-provoking journey, to say the least.
And if you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out Professor Ahmed Benafa's work. Right. He's a real leader in this field, and he's got some amazing insights to share.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring